Hello, my name is Beverly Bushyhead. I'm the Program Director at Nonprofits Assistance Fund in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm pleased to welcome you today to the webinar titled The S Word in Pursuit of Sustainability. You should be hearing audio through your telephone or computer speakers. If you experience any audio issues, call the number provided in your email or hang up and dial in again. If you can hear my voice at this time, make a comment in the chat box. The chat box is in the lower left side of your screen. The chat may need to be turned on if it isn't already. So can you hear me? Thank you. This is how you'll communicate with the presenter at any time during the session. You can type questions or comments into the chat box. You may receive a response right away, or there may be a delay in response so the presenter can address your question to the entire group. Either way, your questions and comments are being monitored throughout this webinar training. A recording of this webinar will be shared with you following today's session, just as it appears here today. If you're ready to begin, raise your hand. To raise your hand, use the control on the menu bar on the bottom of your computer screen, where you can change your status to hand raised. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. This webinar was designed and developed and is presented to you by the Nonprofits Assistance Fund. Nonprofits Assistance Fund invests capital and expertise in nonprofits through loans, training, practical guidance, and financial management resources. Visit our website for more information about our full menu of services. On January 1st, our organization merged with MAP for Nonprofits. This merger has resulted in the ability to offer more services to the sector. Some of those additional services include nonprofit startup assistance, fiscal sponsorship and agency, governance and leadership training, and accounting support with technical assistance. Visit their website at www.mapfornonprofits.org to learn more. You'll also receive a link with that information, so you don't have to remember it. Today's webinar will be led by Glenn Northington. Glenn is the Special Initiatives Director at Nonprofits Assistance Fund. Glenn's career has been dedicated to working with and for nonprofit organizations. From his days as a college marketing professor, he went on to hold marketing management positions at nonprofits including the Guthrie Theater and Minnesota Opera. At Target, he worked to promote the company's support of nonprofits in local communities across the country and managed its national arts and food philanthropic portfolios. Here at Nonprofits Assistance Fund, he uses his passion for relationship development, teaching, and training to assist nonprofits in achieving their missions. And now, I'll turn it over to Glenn.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on which time zone you're in. This is Glenn Northington, and first I want to thank you all for joining us today. I know there's lots of things you could be doing, and we appreciate the fact that you're spending some time with us to dig deeper into sustainability. Sustainability is everywhere we look these days. It seems like that's a word that you see every time you look at an article, go to a workshop, attend a conference. Some people have said that sustainability is just the current buzzword, but those of us at Nonprofits Assistance Fund think that it is very important for leaders, for advocates, for supporters in the nonprofit sector, because this is really about ensuring that their valuable work will continue, and that's what sustainability is all about. Sustainability isn't some place that you get to and you've reached it. It really is a journey or an approach that your organization incorporates all the time as it accepts uncertainty and change. At Nonprofits Assistance Fund, we've had the honor of working with a lot of nonprofit organizations as they pursue their path of sustainability. So we've come up with 10 lessons we've learned through this work that we'll be sharing with you today in this slide presentation. We're going to begin with the first lesson, which sounds very obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you are doing great work. You should be asking yourself, is your product or service the best it can be? Is it better than the competition? Is it helping us progress toward the mission of the organization? You have to define what great is and then make sure that you're actually working in that direction to achieve greatness. we've all been, unfortunately, have experienced work that isn't great, whether it be a performance at a performing arts organization or a meal at a restaurant or service from a service organization where you've had less than an ideal experience. And probably many of you at that point said, we're not going to come back again. So realize the same thing can happen with your patrons or clients or customers if we're not doing the great work that they're expecting of us. As an example, here in the Twin Cities, there is an organization on the north side of Minneapolis called Northside Achievement Zone. It was modeled on the Harlem Children's Zone of New York City, if you're familiar with that one. And they are trying very hard to make sure that they are doing great work and measuring their success in achieving that greatness. In this particular model, what they do is surround a family with all the resources they need to support their children from birth through graduation from high school and ready for college. Every step of the way in their processes, they are measuring to make sure that they're achieving their goals and their milestones. They're determining how they'll know if they've achieved greatness and then measuring it to see if they have, and if not, making adjustments and alterations as they go to make sure they continue to achieve that greatness that they know they can do. With it, they've worked with a number of different organizations. They've worked with a number of different partners. They know they can't do it alone. And so what they've done is set up a system and a lot of milestones along the way to be able to measure actually if they are achieving that greatness they want to. Do they have the right structure? Do they have the right collaboration? Are they measuring the right things? And they're continuously improving what they're doing to make sure that they are indeed achieving the great work that they know they can do. Lesson 2. Most of the time, all of us that are in the nonprofit world, and Nonprofits Assistance Fund and MAP for Nonprofits both are as well, always talk about that we just need some more revenue. If we just had some more revenue, look at all the wonderful things we could do or the additional things that we could do. And when you look at sustainability, it isn't really just about more revenue. It's really looking at what's the right sources of revenue. The amount is important, but where it comes from is also important. As you look at revenue, we often just sort of lump it together and say we need more income. But if you really break it out and look at it further, it really is understanding each of the different pieces of the pie of the revenue and determining which piece of the pie is the right one for you to expand to be able to increase your revenue and do what you need to do with your nonprofit. The more pieces of the pie you have, or the more sources of revenue you have, the more complex your organization is likely to be. In an article that was done in Nonprofit Quarterly by Minnesota Council of Nonprofits Executive Director John Pratt, he looked at revenue based on two different criteria, one being reliability and one being autonomy. Reliability being how sure you are that you'll continue to receive funding from this source of revenue. And autonomy is once you get it, how much flexibility do you have and how it's actually spent. And John encouraged us to go through and look at our revenue sources in this way to determine where on this grid our revenue sources fall. So as we think about needing to expand revenue, the question is what kind of revenue do you want to expand? For most organizations, the kind they want to expand is the ones that they have high reliability and high autonomy. Although that may not be the easiest place to get additional funds, that often is where people see that they could better use the funds and use it the way they want to. In the example you have on the screen, for example, you see that foundation grant, and I will say this is an example. It might be different for you based upon the relationships you have with your funding partners, but this is sort of where they normally fall in sort of a generalization among all people getting the funding streams. But if you look at the lower left-hand corner where it says foundation grants based upon a project, you'll see that in that particular case, usually you have fairly low reliability because foundations can change their funding priorities. They may determine that they've done this particular project and want to move on. They may decide that it doesn't align with what they're currently trying to accomplish within the community. And from an autonomy perspective, you have very little choice in how it's spent. Once you've done a proposal and gotten the money for that particular project, you have to spend the money for that particular project. So it's fairly low autonomy, fairly low reliability as an example of one of the funding sources you can look at. If, on the other hand, you look further to the right where it says program fees and earned, you'll see that whenever you're looking at earned income, you have lots of autonomy because earned income has no restrictions as far as how it's spent. You choose to spend the earned income how you want to spend it. And as long as you keep providing the kind of service or product that people are looking for, oftentimes you'll have fairly high reliability. This is just an example as you look at your funding sources to really step back from your revenue streams and not only think about I need more revenue to do what I'm trying to accomplish, but thinking about what kind of revenue you need and how reliable they are and how much autonomy you have once you achieve them. Again, continuing with the article that John did, in the article he did in Nonprofit Quarterly, he talked about the different kinds of revenue archetypes there are. And again, here's examples of 6 archetypes as far as what you could have within your different funding stream possibilities within your nonprofit. All of you have probably heard that you need to diversify your revenue streams, and that's very important. But I will say that the more revenue streams you have, the more complex your organization and probably the more infrastructure you need in your organization. If you're trying to get revenue from all 6 of the types that are listed on the screen, you'll have to have a very large development staff to be able to do that probably. For most nonprofits, they focus on 2 or 3 because they can find that they can do 2 or 3 well. It's a staff size that usually nonprofits can manage financially, and they figure out an area that they get the most expertise or they're the best at, and they put all their energy and effort in those. So for example, you are interested in earned income. That takes a certain skill to be able to develop earned income. It may require you to do marketing or product differentiation or compete with competitors that are out there. That's a different skill set than maybe if you're attracting individual supporters, which is much more relationship development and communications on a one-to-one basis and making sure your reputation stays where you want it to so the individuals continue to support you. I will also say if you're a nonprofit and most of your funding falls into maybe 1 or 2 of these categories, then it's important to diversify within a category. For example, if you have grant funding, then diversify within that grant funding so all the funding isn't coming from 1 or 2 grants, so that if you lose that funding, it would put your organization in jeopardy. And again, just a way to make sure that you have the sustainability and you can continue into the future. Lots of information about revenue, obviously an area that I know nonprofits, all of us spend a lot of time thinking about, but it really is thinking about the types of revenue and where you're best at achieving that income and concentrating in those areas. The third lesson we've learned in the pursuit of sustainability and working with our nonprofits is that you really do have to know the true program costs, and if you aren't able to cover all those program costs from their own revenue sources, that you are subsidizing them. I will say this is one of those areas that Nonprofits Assistance Fund is very passionate about. We see it as a very keen priority that nonprofits really have to understand the true cost of a program, which is direct costs, shared direct cost, indirect cost, administration cost, all of them. What's the true cost? I'm going to quickly do an example just to give an idea of probably what most of us do. Oftentimes if we're working on doing a proposal for some sort of grant or some sort of project, we'll get some sort of request for proposal that says, like this one, this is a school district that has a contract and they'll pay $5,000 for a 2-week residency. For most of us then, when we do the proposal and submit it, we're going to say that it costs us $5,000 to do it, because that's what they're giving us. We want to show we can achieve it within the means that they've given us. But the question is, what does it truly cost you to plan for, prepare for, deliver, and evaluate that residency? That's the true program cost, and the thing that probably most of us don't spend enough time really understanding. So to go through visually very quickly an example, we're going to go through and talk about true program costs. This outer circle looks at direct program expenses, those things that are uniquely tied to a specific program, and if you weren't doing that program, those expenses would go away. So start with the direct program costs. Then you go to the shared direct expenses, which are things like the website that all the different programs use, or the supplies that you all use, or the IT structure. They're direct costs for your program, but it's shared between more than one program. You then look at what are the fundraising costs. What does it actually cost you to raise the funding for this particular program and for all your programs? And then also the admin costs. What's the cost of the administration of running the programs? What I will say here, you notice is somewhat different from this and what you may see oftentimes in talking about costs, is oftentimes you'll see administration and fundraising as a wedge or a pie slice out of the full pie, which makes it look like that you're taking away from the critical aspects of what the organization is doing. We believe that fundraising and admin is at the core of what you do, and without those you wouldn't have programs. So we like to show it as sort of as the center and everything else revolving around it, because without those as the structure or foundation, everything else that you have around the outside of it wouldn't exist if you didn't have what's in the middle. Continuing this, then you would actually look at what's the program cost for your artist in residence program, for example, what's your program cost for an artist development program that you have, and what's the program cost for the dance productions that you're doing, and actually break it out and look at those true program costs for each one of them. For some of you that enjoy a more numbers-based as opposed to a more visual-based, this just pulls the same information into a structure with numbers that allows you to think about what's the true cost of the programs. Again, in this particular example, which is true for most performing arts, the performances oftentimes don't make enough money to cover all the expenses, and oftentimes there are other things that you can do which will add some sort of surplus that will allow you to then supplement the cost of the other programs. What I'll say with this one, and you can go through and look at this, and this is just an example, you have the total income, you have direct expenses, either those that are direct or those that are shared with others, a distribution of the overhead based upon expenses, and then your total expenses. As you look at this one, the performing arts program is losing or is not making $12,000 that of its cost. There's more cost than revenue. The classes is having a surplus of $10,000. So in this particular organization, the classes program would be supplementing the performing program within the organization. There's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, that's a great way of looking at your organization, but you should be aware that's what you're doing. Let's say, for example, performing obviously is a critical part of what a dance organization would need to do, but what if the performing was a program that really wasn't that critical to your mission? By understanding the true program costs, you might say, I don't think we should be supplementing this particular program and taking money away from other programs. Maybe we should look at either can this one develop more revenue, or is there a way that somebody else should be doing this instead of us? But really sort of understanding those so you can make the true strategic decisions that you need to. The other thing that's vital here is, let's say, for example, you're a dance organization. Even if you look at the bottom line, you're going to have a deficit of $2,000 this year based upon the numbers that we're seeing. So you might say, we have a deficit, we need to cut a program. Performing is the key program within our organization, so we'll cut the classes program. And realize if you do that, you're just taking your deficit from a $2,000 deficit to a $12,000 deficit. There might be some of the revenue, some of the shared revenue that could go back and forth, but then all of the shared expenses would also be hitting one particular program. So again, just understanding what the true costs and the true revenue are for programs helps you make some of those really critical decisions that you need to make. I will mention on our website we do have resources that you can go turn to the resource tab, looking at true program costs, and there's a grid to help you determine true program costs. We also periodically do webinars on just true program costs. So again, any of those, if this is an area that interests you, there's other resources to help you dig deeper into it. Lesson number 4, commits to your infrastructure. Again, as we've already mentioned, with the various types of revenue that you have to do, depending on where you're going after revenue will require different structure as far as staff. Infrastructure also is all those things as far as systems and equipment and facilities as well as staff that you need to be aware of as far as what you need to actually accomplish your mission and to be sustainable so you can continue to survive and go into the future. You need an adequate infrastructure, and there's different kinds of infrastructures for different things that you need to achieve. Some things you've got to do that are just mandatory. You need an infrastructure to be able to process employee payroll. to have the board meetings, to be able to submit sales tax, to do your fundraising. Those are mandatory just for you to continue to survive as an organization. You also can do capacity building, where you actually have infrastructure that helps you build your capacity or do more with your resources, which could include marketing or systems like your computer, your IT systems, things that help you grow and become better at what you do. And you also need structures that allow you to be strategic. Structures to be able to do research and development. Structures to be able to develop new programs as the need arises. Structures to be able to do strategic planning so that you can always keep thinking about ways to get better and do more in the future. As you look at your infrastructure, it's all about what structure your organization needs to manage and develop your staff, to generate the revenue you need, to deliver the programs you've promised, to communicate internally and externally with your clients and with your staff, to plan effectively, to evaluate. You need to determine what that structure looks like and make sure that you have the right things in place to be able to achieve the goals that you need to for today and also build for the future. And this is one that I will say is often hard because oftentimes you need to add infrastructure in order to grow, but you haven't grown yet. And so it's that sort of leap of faith that's often hard for staff and board to say, no, if we really are going to grow to the next level, we have to add the infrastructure now so we can grow. And it might be through volunteers or through contractors until you get there, but getting that infrastructure in place so you actually can continue to get larger. Lesson number 5, capital is key to success and the future of an organization. And capital includes cash, it includes savings, it includes physical structures, it includes anything that you need to be able to, again, be able to function today and also be able to function into the future. When you look at capital, it usually is divided into sort of 3 categories, and we'll divide this again in the next slide into 3 categories as well, where you really do need to have some stability, which is often in the form of cash. You need to be able to have enough cash flow to cover your expenses as they come in so that you don't get into debt or far behind as you're processing through the normal day-to-day or month-to-month expenses that come along. So you need cash for stability. You need reserves for resiliency. You need to be able to have something in savings so if something doesn't quite go right, you aren't, that doesn't put you in jeopardy of not being able to continue to function. Or if something comes along that's really a great opportunity, it gives you that opportunity to take advantage of it because you have the cash there to be able to do it. And you may also need cash for durability. If you have a building, you'll need cash to make sure that you can put the roof on when you need to or change the HVAC system when you need to. Some of those long-term assets and cash is in place to be able to do those into the future as well. When you look at it, all nonprofit organizations need operating revenue and working capital. You've got to have the cash to be able to meet your current cash and expense needs. Probably for many of you, this is what keeps you up at night, is if you don't have this cash and you have to worry about how you're going to pay the next bill or make the next payroll. All organizations need some sort of working capital or cash. Most organizations also need some sort of reserve, whether that be to be able to replace fixed assets when the time arises, some sort of savings account so that if something comes along that doesn't go as you expected, you can cover that, or some sort of opportunity to be able to take those risks and go forward with it. Most organizations also would need that as well. And some, but not all organizations, will need some sort of building reserves or some sort of endowment fund. I will say as you look at this, again, note that all need the top one, most need this one, and only some need this one. I think oftentimes as nonprofits, we all believe that, oh, if we could just have an endowment, everything would be fine. And I just want to say that for most organizations, or for all organizations, you first should worry about what is my cash and my operating capital, then what is my reserves that I have, and only if those 2 areas have been satisfied and you feel very strong should you explore a building or an endowment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on endowment. I'll just say that with endowments, realize that most organizations would consider sort of a 5% draw on their endowment to be sort of typical. So to get a 5% draw, if you had $1 million in an endowment, your draw would be $50,000. So while $50,000 is a lot of money, and I'm not saying it isn't, realize you've had to raise $1 million to get the 50 coming annually, and for the $1 million you cannot touch. It has been designated by the givers that it will never be spent, that it will stay as the corpus to draw the interest from, but that $1 million is not something that you can go into. It's there to help you for future revenue, but it's not a resource that you can use right now if you need it. So again, if you can do an endowment, great, but first make sure you've got the operating capital, then the reserves, and then if those two are both satisfied, think about the endowments and the building funds. As you look at capital, oftentimes what organizations find is they have inadequate capital, again, not enough cash to cover cash flow. Those sort of cyclical aspects of revenue and expenses is often a challenge, and so some sort of reserve, again, to even help you with your cash flow, your working capital is really important. Organizations may also find that there's gaps in capitalization, meaning that they have too many restrictions on it. Capital is sitting there, but it's got to be used for a certain program or in a certain time period or for a certain client base. And so while there may be money there, they can't use it for the particular thing they need to do, like paying payroll right now. And then again, for some, it's a misaligned capital, simply meaning that it's the wrong kind of capital. And again, oftentimes this gets into the endowment question, where it really is you have the capital there, but it's such that you can't use it for what you need it for at that particular point in time. I will say again, with our online resources, there's lots of resources around looking at reserve policies. Is something you can find online. There's other organizations that also are very much devoted to looking at capitalization. I happen to serve on the board of grant makers in the arts. Capitalization is one of the 4 pillars that we spend time with, knowing that particularly in arts organizations, undercapitalization is often one of the big challenges they face, and really thinking about how we help organizations better develop their reserves is one of the things that's of critical importance to many organizations helping with capacity building. Lesson number 6, and after this I'm going to take a brief break to see if there's any questions out there, but question number 6 really is about business models. And what you're going to see with this particular one, or this particular lesson, is that it pulls together everything we've talked about in lessons 1 through 5 and pulls them all together into one and looks at business models, with business models really being those systems that a nonprofit has that allows it to bring in resources and then use them to effectively achieve its mission. That's what its business model is. In the business model, we think of it as sort of 4 cogs that all work together. And if you'll notice, these 4 cogs are exactly what we just talked about in the earlier lessons. Understanding your true program costs, making sure you have the right infrastructure, making sure you have the right capital with cash and reserves, and then making sure you have the right revenue mix, or you understand which pieces of those pie you can best leverage to be able to bring in more money and do what you're trying to do. All of these work together so that if you change any one of them, you then have an impact on the other 3. So it really does work together very much as cogs working together, wheels turning together. And the changes usually don't happen quickly. And again, there is something that happens with all of them if you make one change. For example, let's say in your revenue mix you decided, I'm going to increase my revenue by getting more individual donors. That would then change your revenue mix as you want more revenue from individuals, which changes your infrastructure, because that quite likely means you've got to hire a new staff person to be able to come in and really concentrate on working with individual donors, which would then increase your program costs, because then there's additional expenses that need to be spread across either that program or all programs, and then would change your capital structure, because then it's quite likely that some of the dollars maybe you had in reserves or were looking for other uses would now need to be allocated to the infrastructure. Great decision, and looking at that investment in the infrastructure is a great thing to do, but just know that as you make that decision, all the rest of the cogs also are affected by that, and the whole way you look at how you can spend those resources or use those resources are then impacted by that decision. One change affects all of them. They're all important, but really understanding each one of these cogs well, like what are your true program costs, what is the infrastructure you need to be successful today and be sustainable in the future, what is your current capital and how do you improve your reserves, and what's the right revenue mix will all affect that business model. So it really is like a puzzle. You change one piece, you alter one piece, you move one piece, you've changed the entire thing. And you need to then think about each one that you move, how does that impact the other things within your organization or within the whole structure of your organization. Let me take a brief pause here to see if there's specific questions of anything leading up to this, which really is anything around true program costs, infrastructure, revenue, capital, and how all those combine into a business model. And then we'll continue on with the last lessons we've learned as far as sustainability. So any current questions?
Glenn, a question came in about a funding model, and I'm understanding that to mean a revenue mix. And so someone is hoping that there is information on like the different types of funding models, the different types of revenue mix is what I'm understanding that to be. Can you talk to that just for a second?
Certainly, and what I think you'll find is there may be some models that sort of fit into particular sectors. You may find, for example, a funding model for charter schools that several of them might look somewhat similar within that particular grouping of charter schools, funding models for arts organizations, funding models for community development organizations. I think you'll find wide variations as you go across sector. That you may find that, for example, if you're working with a community development organization, you may have much more funding from government, for example, as opposed to many small organizations might not have much at all from government or might have only state funding and not federal funding. So I think you'll find that it really does vary a lot across the different nonprofits, particularly by sector. And there really isn't, I won't say that there's any one that you can say if you're an arts organization you should have 30% of this type and 25% of this type and 10% of another, because it really does depend on your community. Some communities, for example, are very philanthropic and there might be lots of individual donors, so that's a much larger percentage of your total pie. Whereas others you may find that that's not what the community is used to doing, so you need to look at generating more earned income either from ticket sales or from social enterprise. So I don't think there's sort of a one that fits well, but I do think if you look at within a sector, you would find commonalities between organizations within certain sectors as far as where they're more likely to find funding. Great question. We often, and we know it's not what people want to hear, but we find it NAS, the answer is often it depends, which is, we always like that sort of answer that gives us a definite concrete answer, and so often it does depend on the organization, the community, the relationships that are there, and it unfortunately isn't sort of one model that works for all. Anything else at the moment? If not, we'll move on. And there'll be time for questions at the end as well. This isn't your only chance, but I just thought we'd do a pause here to see if there's anything in particular right now.
Okay, there's no other outstanding questions at this point.
Okay, then let's move on to lesson number 7 as far as what we've learned. What we've learned is that for many nonprofits, they do an annual budget and think they have now accomplished what they need to as far as financial planning. And while we obviously think annual budgets are critical in determining what the plans are for the upcoming year, we also know that they're not really good at helping you think, what do I need to be doing this year to reach a goal that I want to get to 3 years from now? Because it may not help you sort of do that process of thinking, what do I need to do in year 1 and in year 2 and in year 3 to be able to get there? That's what really a 3-year plan or 3-year financial plan will help you do. Back to my example again with the Northside Achievement Zone. Northside Achievement Zone received from the federal government when they first started a $28 million grant. But they were told that the grant would last for 5 years, and at the end of that 5-year period, they needed to have other funding sources so that they would not count on this grant and would be able to be sustainable so they could continue to offer the program that they developed during that course in time. Doing annual budgets probably would not have helped them be able to actually figure out what they needed to do. They had to think longer term, obviously with a 5-year timeline as far as what they were trying to do. This one's hard to see, so what I should call out is if you can see on the screen the lightest blue of the columns, that's the grant from the federal government. So what they did was looked at over the course of the 5 years how that grant would be a large part of their revenue particularly in years 2 and 3, but then they would need to start scaling back on that grant in years 4 and 5. So by the time they finished that, they identified other ways to get individuals, grants from philanthropy, other kind of public or government funding sources to be able to cover that grant. And to be able to do that, they really need to be able to look 5 years in the future and figure out all the things they needed to do to be able to cover what that grant was giving in their first 5 years. To do this, they very much looked at their business model and talked about how the sources of income would change, what kind of reserves they needed in case things didn't go quite as they expected, how the infrastructure would change as they ramped up other giving sources and weren't relying so much on that initial grant, and what the true program costs were and what they needed to actually be able to cover. So they had a very flexible business model that had to continue to morph and grow and change as their funding models also changed, and they made sure that by the time they reached the end of that federal grant, they still were the organization they wanted to be able to provide those kind of resources to the youth within that community. Unfortunately for many of us, we will see a strategic plan that sort of just has bullet point number 5 or number 5 that says to make sure you're financially sustainable. And while that's a great goal that you want to achieve, that doesn't give you enough information on how to achieve it. So what we're just encouraging is think about what it will really take to do this and make sure you have a plan. And again, even a 3-year plan is hard right now because there is so much uncertainty. We've all read stories about what is the economy strong? Is the economy weakening? What will changes in the government do as far as the economy? How could that impact even people's giving? If there are changes as far as, for example, how much they can deduct on their income tax for charitable giving, all those things are happening right now. But it's important to at least do your best guess in looking your 3 years out and trying to figure out what that could look like as far as a financial plan. Lesson number 8 is financial reports are just numbers on a page. And I must say this is something you don't always hear organizations that are so devoted to finance saying, but unless you really help people understand your financial statements, they probably aren't going to be as valuable as they need to be. In this particular joke from the Wall Street Journal, it says, we're in good shape, nobody understands our financial statements. I will say this should not be your goal within your organization or with your board. Unfortunately, I think sometimes for nonprofits it is. They think the more they can keep the board in the dark so they don't understand the financial statements, the less questions they'll have. And I would say that's exactly what you don't want. You want as many people that are experts looking at your finances and making sure you're looking at all of it and seeing any place there might be a red flag before it actually becomes a red flag. So the clearer you can make your financial statements for your staff and for your board, the better it is. This image is simply saying, just like you wouldn't sit in front of a guest, all the elements of the cake, and say you figure out what's important and you figure out how to mix them and you figure out how to do this, you shouldn't do that with your financial statements either. You really should take the financial statements and help people figure out this is what's important. These are the 3 numbers we consider to be the most critical. These are the trends we're seeing. These are how they compare to industry benchmarks. You should do everything you can to help both internal and external audiences truly understand what the financial statements are telling us and what they mean and what we think is important to do. Because without your help, they may be focusing on the wrong numbers. They may be spending their time looking at things that aren't the critical things you need their help with. You need to help guide them in the right direction. So in looking at the financial statements, you need to make sure you're preparing accurate ones, firstly, that you understand what they mean, analyze what they mean, help interpret what they mean, and then communicate and use that information with your staff and with your board. This may be through a dashboard. This may be through, again, highlighting key things on your balance sheet and income statement. It may be pulling out sort of an executive summary with here are the 5 things we're watching, then with the full balance sheet and income statement as supplementary information for people that want to dig deeper. But anything you can do to help people really understand those numbers and what they mean and what you think is important, the easier it will be for them to help partner with you on those financial statements. Financial leadership is not accounting, and again, this is not anything against accounting. Accounting is critical in an organization. But if you are the executive director or the financial leader and people are looking at you for leadership, accounting is step one. And then you take that and you collect that data, and then you move toward leadership where you actually help people understand it to keep the organization sustainable. If you look at financial management, that's actually the collection of data, the producing of reports, oftentimes more of a short-term kind of goal, oftentimes with the financial management. Financial leadership is what people in financial positions in nonprofits achieve to do, or what their goal is to achieve. And that's actually helping the nonprofit really understand where they are today, but where that means they're going in the future, as a way to, again, very clearly state, and this is how or what we need to do to make sure we're sustainable going down the line. What do we need to do as far as expenses? What do we need to do as far as revenue? What are the trends showing us? What are some things that we need to really make sure we're aware of, so that we're always thinking about what we need to do today to make sure we can continue to be the success we are in the future. And this is a balancing act. All of you know that oftentimes it's that hard decision of what are you going to do today and what are you going to make sure you need to do today that's also future focused. I'll say part of that goes to, again, with some organizations, reserves are hard for them. They look at dollars that are being saved within their organization and think, oh, that's dollars we should be spending today to help us accomplish our mission. And while I'm not saying you shouldn't be accomplishing your mission, what a financial leader helps people in an organization realize is that the dollars we're saving today is to make sure the organization will be strong in the future. It really is looking at sustainability. The reserve fund today is so we can replace the air conditioning unit 3 years from now. The reserve fund today is because we know there's going to be an ED transition, and we need to have the money ready to be able to pay for a search firm to help us do that. It's that understanding of what your dollars today are being reserved for to be able to help you in the future. So with the balancing act, you need to look at financial sustainability, looking at today's needs as well as future needs. Programmatic sustainability, again, what do you need to be able to make sure that you can continue to evolve your programs, continue to develop new programs to make sure you stay responsive to your community and you're giving them what they need from your organization. And then organizational sustainability, to make sure that you are developing the leadership and the structures and the systems that you need, not only for today, but also for the future, to make sure you're continuing to stay responsive, again, to what the community needs. All of these you've got to think about today. What do you want to continue to do? Are there things that you need to transition out of as you look at where you need to be growing and going into the future? All of those things are part of this balancing act as you look at financial leadership within an organization. And for many, the financial leader is also the executive director and may also be the program director. For small nonprofits, you may be wearing all those different hats. And so try to figure out exactly what that looks like as far as what you need to do as far as financial leadership. And I will say, if you are in a small nonprofit and you are wearing many hats, you really do need to have a board that helps you with this. Make sure that the board understands, again, the financial statements and can help you with this, because one person can't do it alone. You can't do it by yourself. It also can sometimes get, if the boards are involved with them, might help them become more helpful as far as generating revenue if they understand the whole picture. It may help them be able to ask the right questions or help you if you've got several options that you're looking at. So again, you never want a board to say, oh, we had no idea that this was going to happen if you happened into a crisis. They should know every step of the way where the organization is going and be ready to help you if things don't go exactly as planned. Lesson 10, and I alluded to this at the beginning and we're circling back to it now, is that sustainability really is a journey. It's a frame of mind. It's a philosophy. It's an orientation. You'll never arrive at sustainability and say, okay, now I'm done and I can just sit here and read the newspaper. You're constantly needing to be changing and evolving and moving because you constantly need to figure out ways to react to what's happening in the environment so that you continue to remain sustainable. An example just here, and this was Minnesota particularly looking at rugged 3 years, economic instability, uncertainties, financial downturns, hard look at internal capacities. This very much could have been clipped from a newspaper or an online story today. In reality, it's from a story from 1994. So all I'm showing with this is that the challenges that we face as nonprofits never go away. They're always there. The issues aren't changing. The challenges aren't changing. The need to continue to evolve isn't changing, which is why you have to constantly be looking at ways to keep yourself sustainable, because things are always happening that could in some ways jeopardize the sustainability. So you always have to be looking for ways to make sure that you are going to continue to be sustainable. Most organizations go through a life cycle, and oftentimes spend a lot of their time in the mature or sort of that peak of that bell curve. And it's only when you start to decline or slide that you need to really figure out, is it time to end this organization? Have you done what you were going to do? Has the goal been met, or has someone else come along that can do it better and better use those resources? Because dissolving or ending might be the right thing to do. Or in order to remain sustainable, do you need to reinvent yourself or bring in something new or look at new ways to deliver the services or to a new group of clients as a way to move yourself back into the growth phase to be able to sustain yourself for even longer? So this is one of those, again, that's constant, and for many organizations, when you hit a decline phase, obviously scares us all, but it's that point you really step back and go, okay, what is the right decision for the community, for the resources, for the organization? Do we continue to grow and expand, or is it a time that, again, someone else can come in and do this better, this service better, and do we need to change in some way to meet a new need that we weren't meeting before? In order to be sustainable, again, you really have to figure out how you can do what you need to do today while also making sure you have the capacity to continue in the future. That's what sustainability is. And it really is, as I've said several times now, it's ongoing. You need to constantly be looking at, are we doing good work? Are we using the resources well? Are we meeting the needs of the client base? And making sure you're doing it today, but also thinking about it, how's that going to change in the future, so we make sure that we're ready in the future no matter what comes along. Again, sustainability is very comprehensive, as we've mentioned here, with the variety of the things that are involved with sustainability. And while it's hard to sort of do sustainability into a capsulization, I'm going to try to. First of all, I'm going to say that I think for an organization to achieve sustainability or achieve going towards sustainability, because you never actually get there, you've got to have really strong leadership, which includes not only financial leadership, but also a really strategic leader that understands present as well as future, and also the ability to develop relationships, whether that be relationships with your clients, relationships with donors and funders, relationships with your communities, relationships with other nonprofits so that you're sharing in the accomplishment of some of those bigger goals and objectives that you want to accomplish within your community. To do that, I actually see three parts of sustainability, which we've talked about during the course of this webinar. The first one is, I think you need to be able to do great work. And that usually means show that you have some sort of impact, like that you're actually achieving your mission. If your mission is to reduce hunger, show that you're reducing hunger within the community. If your achievement, when I worked at Target, the goal of Target at that point was to help improve reading by the end of the 3rd grade. How do you show that you're moving toward that? So do great work and show that you have some sort of impact. Second, a working business model, which is where we spent the majority of our time on this webinar. Truly understand your program costs, have the right infrastructure for success for today and for the future. Look at your capital structure to make sure you have the right mixture of cash and reserves and bigger reserves for those bigger long-term needs, and make sure you have the right revenue mix, the right pieces in your pie, and then which pieces of those pies can you actually expand in some way. And then always, again, realize that you're always evolving, so you have a capacity to adapt. Do you need to expand or grow in some way? Do you need to actually focus and narrow? Because that's what you need to do now. How do you make sure that whatever you're doing, you're meeting the needs of the community and staying relevant? So as the community needs change, you need to be able to change and adapt as well to be able to be successful today and also into the future. That ends what we have here, but let's again open it up to questions to see if there's questions. I know that Bev has been doing a terrific job of answering the questions as they've come in. She'll also come back again, and we've mentioned several things on the website. The website address is now given on the slide in front of you. And there's lots of things under the resource tab. Again, if you haven't looked at that, go there. Under the training tab with some of the upcoming either public trainings we do here or some of the free webinars that we do. Again, all the resources and webinars are free, so you can take part of those whenever you want to. But are there other questions right now before Bev closes this out?
While we're waiting on those questions, I just want to remind everyone you'll receive a recording of this webinar after today's session, as well as the resources that we shared during the webinar. So you'll get an email with that recording and with all the resources that we talked about and shared in the chat box today. So you'll get everything. So just waiting on questions. If you have anything you'd like to ask, please write it in the chat box.
And again, I want to say thank you all for joining us today as we're waiting for the questions. Because what I love is how many of you want to dig even more deeply into this and think about the ways you can strengthen your nonprofit organization so that it continues to do the amazing things that it does in your community, both today and looking for how it's sustainable to continue into the future.
Yeah, a lot of great work going on out there. So thank you everyone for participating. Please take a few minutes to complete a short evaluation survey that will appear on your screen when the webinar ends. Your feedback helps us improve our training and responds to the training needs out there in the sector that we may not be aware of. Also, as Glenn mentioned, check our resources at our website at the address on your screen at this point, www.nonprofitsassistancefund.org, or you can contact us anytime at 612-278-7180. I appreciate you attending. Thanks, Glenn, for doing such a terrific job on the webinar. And look for your recording. I hope everyone has a really great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.